This simple math trick helped me score a 524 on the Mcat. In this video, I'm going to be discussing some tricks to quickly estimate square roots on the Mcat. And this is a useful tool to have in your arsenal because remember that on the Mcat, there's no calculator allowed. And usually with square roots, especially complex ones that might come out to be decimals, we're used to just plugging those into our calculators, but we can't do that. So how can we simplify things? Well, the first thing you want to remember are perfect squares. And so these you just have to have memorized. So some examples would be like 8 squared is equal to 64, 9 squared is equal to 81, 10 squared is of course equal to 100, 11 squared is going to be 121, 12 squared is going to be 144, 144, and then 15 squared is simply 225, and then lastly 20 squared, a good one to have, is 400. So we can use these perfect squares for the following tricks, quote unquote. The first one I'm going to call bounding, so bounding. And this is best illustrated using an example. Say we want to find the square root of 73. Well, this is not a perfect square that we have memorized. It's not a perfect square at all. And it's going to come out to be some sort of decimal number. So how can we easily estimate what that's going to be? Well, we notice that it is actually very close to two other perfect squares, which are specifically 64, the square root of 64, and the square root of 81. And we can actually say that since 64 is less than 73, then the square root of 64 has to be less than the square root of 73. And then also, since the square root of 73 is less, or 73 is less than 81, then the square root of 73 has to be less than the square root of 81. And we know what these two bounds are. The square root of 64 is simply 8, right? And that's got to be less than the square root of 73, which then has to be less than 9, which is the answer for the square root of 81. And so the square root of 73, what we're trying to find, has to be somewhere between 8 and 9. And we can say that it's approximately 8.5. And that's certainly a close enough answer for Mcat purposes. So whenever you have a square root that's, you can't just immediately solve it, try to find two perfect squares on either side of it and apply this bounding principle. Now, there's also another trick that you can remember, which is basically called the difference of squares. Difference of squares. And so again, for this one, let's use an example. Difference of squares. So let's say we want to find the square root of 104. Okay. Again, this is not something that we just know. It's got to be a decimal. So we can rewrite this though as being equal to the square root of 100 plus 4. And then whenever we can get a square root in this form, we can apply